think that the ugly history of blackface is behind us, but before you head off for that self-congratulatory victory lap, I'd like to introduce you to a term you might not be familiar with. It's called digital blackface. Yes, it seems America's oldest form of cultural vulturism has updated itself for the social media age. What is digital blackface, you ask? It is the increasingly common practice of using the cover of online anonymity to disguise your true identity by playing racial dress-up. I'm Doris Dar Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. Now, digital blackface can be done in a number of ways, often by uploading a deceptive profile picture or not using one at all, and simply announcing in the comments that you're black and using that false identity as a way to bolster your position around the issue of race. It's generally done to justify behaviors that might not be considered racist if a black person were co-signing them, as in, I'm black and I don't think behavior X is racist at all. This practice was on full display in November of 2020 when former Pennsylvania Republican congressional candidate Dean Browning tweeted from his account, "I'm a gay black guy, and I can personally say that Obama did nothing for me. My life only changed a little bit, and it was for the worse." It was then discovered that he thought he was tweeting from his burner blackface account, under which he had posted several racist and sexist tweets in the past. He offered a convoluted explanation for the whole debacle, but the damage had already been done, and he lost his primary bid. This is perhaps the most extreme example of something that happens on a much smaller scale quite often on social media. Post a comment under a video about race, claiming to be a black person who doesn't have a problem with certain racist language or behavior, and chiding your fellow black people for being victims, sheep, pawns, whatever. The second form of digital blackface is a bit more insidious. It's more common with younger people on social media, and that's the adoption of what's known as AAVE in online spaces. AAVE is an acronym for African American Vernacular English. It's an informal dialect created by African Americans that has evolved over time. It contains a lot of the slang that ends up being popularized once it hits the mainstream. As with real-life blackface, the commenter isn't necessarily trying to present themselves as an actual black person. Nowadays, they adopt the language or cadence of African Americans to appear more edgy or street smart than they actually are. In short, they do it because it's cool. The third form of digital blackface is usually done innocently enough. It has to do with the use of emojis or GIFs of African Americans to express various emotions online. Stanley from The Office rolling his eyes, Raven-Symoné chewing gum furiously. There's usually no harm meant by it, but when it's used by people outside of the black community, it can perpetuate negative stereotypes of black people as overly emotional, aggressive, highly animated, or buffoonish. There is a direct through line to the era of minstrelsy, where black people were used as stand-ins to express a broad range of emotions that white people weren't comfortable expressing themselves. The important thing to remember is that blackface, whether done in the real world or online, doesn't necessarily have to possess ill intent in order to cause harm. Once you know better, you do better. In part 2, I'll talk about a close cousin of blackface called blackfishing.